So this is a provision with regard to retention of traffic data. Now, what I just showed was the definition of a service provider. The definition of service provider basically is anybody who basically is part of sending, receiving any communication or other services, which could include you. And remember, the definition is including but not limited to. So everybody who's got a router who's providing this kind of service to anybody is going to be part of the definition of service provider, and they would have to minimum 90 days keep all the traffic data.
So in your house, if you have a router and up to 5 people can connect to your Wi-Fi network.
If I'm out of my house providing that service to my neighborhood, yeah, absolutely.
No, so my neighbors actually illegally.
Well, they shouldn't be doing that, but if they are, then I guess maybe. It's a gray area. It's a gray area, but maybe. But definitely cyber cafes.
Like an airport.
Yes, sir.
Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
He's providing this as a service.
Yes.
And then millions of people going in day in day out. And 90 days की उनकी सबके का डेटा तो उसके पास एयरपोर्ट बंद करके सर्वर लगा दो.
That's what they're going to do. Cyber cafes, as Starbucks, if there's a Starbucks here, Costa Coffee, Civil Aviation Authority at the airport, Marriott Hotel, Sheraton. Did they talk to them before they talked to this? Did they ask them whether it makes sense? Did they even talk to the ISPs? I know for a fact they didn't speak to the ISPs. I actually met with an ISP yesterday, one of the largest ISPs.
IMAX guy is going to be really in trouble.
Yeah, IMAX is going to be in trouble also. Did they speak to Mobilink? They're providing GPRS activity. Are they keeping 90-day minimum data like that or not? Nobody knows. Did they ask them? They did not. And they can extend this period.
They're starting to track SMS traffic now.
Yeah.
Which is
fine for the intelligence agencies, but here what they're trying to do is completely something different. In addition to this, don't forget that basically they can extend the period and ask you to cooperate in any form. Now, this is important, and I'm just doing this for the retake. So, fulfilling all requirements of data and keep it in original form, which means that I'm going to get a bad actor, right? I just did that. Fulfilling all the requirements of originality, which means that the amount of procedures that you have to have in place in order to keep it original is quite massive. And you can't expect, Costa Coffee to do that. You can't expect digital signatures in original forms to be maintained by people who are running small cyber cafes. In fact, what it means is that you can't reformat your hard drive. What if your hard drive actually crashes? What happens then? So there's a whole bunch of issues around this area which have been dealt with. You can't just put in one simple section in and say, yeah, we've dealt with the problem. No, we haven't. I'm not saying again that this is not something that should be there. It should be there, but it needs to be thought through. They need to consult with the correct people, get their views, and make sure that it's holistic. You had a question?
On this comes down to two aspects. One is, as a service provider, or any other place, I as a user of the service would not be comfortable with my password, because the moment I enter my password to log into my email service, technically this law requires that data also be stored,
yes,
and the email I read also to be stored,
yes,
and the chat I
all
have also to be stored.
Basically.
Yes.
So I have to be an absolute idiot to be comfortable with that.
Yes. But you're not, right?
I'm not.
No, but
The last time I checked, I was not.
Now this is
yes, you are.
We had some difficulty yesterday when we were talking to some people who said, well, this is fine, it makes sense having this. I'm about to show you slides which show what is the missing part. This is one part of the law. A law has to be balanced. You create a provision of law and you create defenses to it also. That's how you balance it out. And I'll show you how in the UK and in the States that balancing factor actually exists. A customer has a right, he needs to be given a notice that your data is going to be now basically frozen and copied and checked and all of that. And then you have a right of notice, and you have a right to go to the court and say, this is wrong, this is incorrect, or quash this. In Pakistan, if somebody files an FIR against you, you go straight to the High Court, you say quash this FIR. You have the right under the Constitution, under the Criminal Procedure Code. Here, you got no right.
Yeah,
It's worse than the 1800s and the what we call imperialist laws.
No, but how can you prevent them from adding malicious data to
You can't. You just don't know. That's the most difficult aspect. I'm also going to come to that. There is no concept of chain of custody. There is no grounds, there's nothing here that talks about how your rights as citizens is going to be protected against the use or abuse of these kind of laws. That's the problem. You've created all the powers, you've created all the offences, you've given all the powers to the authorities. What about the balancing factor? So you've got a half-baked law. It's half-baked. Now, sorry, G, please.
About legislature, I mean, the legislative authority for those who legislate laws, we have one.
G.
Now, if they legislate a law which is completely unjust,
Yes.
is there no way to take them to court or to take that law to court and
Yes.
say under the Constitution,
Yes.
my rights are being, or human rights are being violated, and therefore this law is not acceptable?
Absolutely.
Is there a provision or is there any method by which I, as an individual or collectively we, as citizens of this country, can take that to court? And is there any chance of our getting that right or under
Yes.
the Constitution?
This is what I've explained to the government every time I've shown them this legislation is that I'm not trying to say that you're bad people or you're trying to get power and you have this power. You're not going to be able to implement this law successfully because you're going to, when you actually go after the cyber criminal or the criminal, he's going to get off on the definitions, he's going to get off on the procedure, he's going to get off on the fact that you didn't use due process, that you didn't have proper forensic methodology, that you did everything arbitrarily, that you didn't have evidence collected properly, and that the law itself is unconstitutional. So one of the things in the petition that we wrote down is that this is in violation of the Constitution of Pakistan. What you can do is, if supposing somebody's been caught, one of the grounds would be that the law by which they're actually trying to actually put him into jail is in its very basic sense unconstitutional. Yes, so the whole point of what I was trying to explain to government previously was that what you're trying to do, you will not achieve if you have a law which is half-baked. If you have a holistic law that shows that it's trying to protect the rights, the legitimate rights of third parties, then obviously that is something that will be in compliance with the Constitution, and therefore you'll be able to get your convictions from the courts. Otherwise, you're leaving loopholes and lacunas available knowingly to criminals so that they can use them.
But in the meantime,
In that, I'm sorry.
In the meantime, the guy goes to jail.
yeah, the guy is there.
Goes to jail. I'm talking specifically in the context of the last thing that you were explaining about how much data.
So you're asking me to think what would happen. Now, if this law came into effect and the authority that was asked to do this goes and actually asks an ISP that please do this, I think they'll have a very difficult time going to a constitutional protection because there's nothing in the Constitution that says that ISPs don't have a right, etc. It's very difficult to create that sort of a challenge in the court. So that's why it's difficult. But if it was a clear violation, you could try and you could attempt to file a petition before the Supreme Court and say that this legislation and this whatever order that has been issued to me is actually in violation of the Constitution, and therefore you need to nullify the order issued by the investigating authority. And with it also the section of the law. You could attempt that.
But haven't I don't know if this is connected, but haven't Google and Yahoo been asked to hand over user data for the last X number of days? And probably, Google refused, but Yahoo and Microsoft complied.
This is China, right?
Yahoo China, yeah. And you know what happened to them? Yahoo got sued in the States for that.
Yeah.
Right? So imagine becoming one of those jurisdictions. You're creating a situation where you're becoming a jurisdiction that is going to get the headlines, but not for the right things, but for the wrong things. Are we going to follow Saudi Arabia and follow China in their practices and how they've regulated the internet?
Yes.
That's what it looks like, and probably worse. And they are trying to reform themselves and change. We're trying to actually copy them and go towards them and actually copy provisions of the Indian legislation. It makes no sense. Another thing that they've set up is the Information Communication Technologies Tribunal. In this tribunal, federal government shall appoint the chairman and members of the tribunal. So basically the federal government initiates an offense or a complaint against you. The federal government puts you into jail. Then you go before the federal government tribunal, not an independent judicial tribunal, and you stand before him, and then they do what they want. Qualifications to be a member of the tribunal: 2 years as a district judge, 10 years high court advocate, special knowledge of legislation and professional experience of not less than 10 years. I don't think you can find many people like that. I'm definitely not.
I don't think the person who wrote this law has this qualification.
He has this qualification.
No, special knowledge of legislation.
Is this
professional
and-
He will say he has it. He will say he has it, but he
Is
doesn't. I know him.
this any of these or all of them?
Any of these. Or one, or two, or three.
Then it can be read by anyone.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I'm saying. Why set up the tribunal? The argument, Mr. Laghari's argument was, and I quote Mr. Laghari day before yesterday what he said in Islamabad, the judges of Pakistan do not have the capacity to understand complex matters dealing with ICT and telecom. That is why we created the tribunal. That's a very dangerous statement to make. That's nearly contempt. You can't do that. That's contempt. And I'm not sure the judges will like what he said there. I don't think that they are that. I have practiced before judges, and trust me, some of them are much more clever than people sitting in government. Okay? So it's unfair for him to have said that. What he could have said was, there's no capacity to handle this due to technical specific knowledge, for which you can always have an amicus curiae appointed. You can say things like that. You're creating arguments to bypass courts. That's not, you got to correct the system. Okay, go and give special knowledge to one particular judge who's sitting on the bench and say, we will teach you, you become the designated judge administratively to manage all these things. And all cases of this nature will come to you. Why do you set up a tribunal? And then appoint them yourselves? Remember, these appointments are not done by the judiciary, these appointments are done by the federal government. Judges are appointed by the judiciary through a judicial process. So you're not getting independent judicial supervision. That's not a democratic free state system.
So you're saying the tribunal is set up by the federal government?
Yes.
Yes.
So they can put anybody there for any amount of time or period. So my question is, where's the independence? Where's the independence? They're going to sit inside probably the Ministry of IT Telecom. No, maybe not. The other thing they've done is they've clubbed together two completely different areas. They've taken they've taken basically cybercrime on the one hand, and they've taken telecom regulation on the other, which is completely separate. FCC telecom regulation in the States or in the UK telecom regulation is a telecom aspect. It's a totally different area and subject. You go before a tribunal to discuss issues about commerce and things and tariffs and other things. You do that. It has nothing to do with a cybercrime magistrate or a tribunal. But guess what? The same tribunal tries both things. So it's a PTA or telecom regulation plus IT plus cybercrime law. Tribunal. It's absolutely silly to do this. Nowhere in the world do they have this except for India. And it's failed in India. It doesn't work there. They're having difficulty in India. They're trying to amend their legislation. We're trying to copy it.
Well, probably the reason we copied it is because we think India is better in many cases.
That shows how much we know. Even though we're next door, we have such limited knowledge about the problems that the Indian. I've actually been to India, I've spoken to the legal experts, I've spoken to the Minister for Information Technology out there in the government, and they have problems with their legislation. They're trying to improve it. When we came out with Electronic Transactions Ordinance in 2002, we didn't follow India. You know, the legislation was written.
Stupid.
Yeah, when the legislation was initially tabled inside the government, that legislation had the word India written in it. Because they did the same thing, like copy mark. Chapa marte. Na chapa mara. ठीक है? अच्छा, when they did that, I said, listen, do you realize legislation is failed? Please don't follow this, follow the rest of the world. Things are working. They followed that, we had a good legislation, I drafted one, gave it to them. Everywhere in the world they went, they showed it, they said, compliant with international law, compliant with this, compliant with that, very good. Pakistan, excellent. And it got a very good review. But with this legislation, we've done the same thing back again. Achha, let's look at India, look at the same old failed legislation and copy all the provisions of that. That's a mistake, don't do that. The Indians are trying to better themselves. We're trying to follow what they've done in the past as a failed historical attempt. Don't do that.
You spoke to the minister, they didn't.
Yeah, they're not allowed to. Okay, so what's the problem? This is the problem. That's the whole issue. You don't have a right to challenge anything. Why do you challenge it? There is nothing in the law about what your rights are. There's everything in the law about what the government can do to you. It talks about what it can do to you. It talks about how you're a criminal. So basically everybody in Pakistan is a convict. Already.
Unless the court takes you on board.
Yes.
Isn't that a basic
Yes.
right of the individual, of every citizen to challenge anything or any law which they find
Let me-
or whatever?
let me tell you an anecdote as to what transpired in the Ministry of IT Telecom when we met a representative of the Software House Association, a representative of even a government organization, CIO, Chief Information Officer of that, and me went and sat and met a Minister of the State for IT, Mr. Hakwani, a gentleman who was trying to assist. He called in a gentleman from there, sat him down, the director, legal, another person sat him down. This gentleman listened to everything we were saying and said, oh, I know what, oh, I see you, I understand now why business has a problem with this. But you don't understand, this law was not made for business, this was made for the nation. Quote unquote. These are his words. And that's the mentality we're dealing with. They don't want to listen to anybody else as to what they're saying, and that's the difficulty. So that's not the only time. Every time you repeat it, 3 days ago, the minister stood up and said, yes, it's absolutely right, yes, we need to change it. Of course, these issues have to be addressed, and then disappeared. We all contacted him, he said, come and meet us. The MD, Pakistan Software Export Board, called him, the secretary didn't call back. So that's the kind of situation we're dealing with. Anyway, take another example. Take the example of an investigation agency seizing the computer, okay, picking up this laptop, adding incriminating evidence into it, maybe pornography, remember the cyber stalking aspect, possibly framing you, the accused has no protection under the bill. In addition to that, how does he protect his IPR or data? How does he do that? Because once they've got your computer, they've got everything that's on your computer. It's got intellectual property on that, other people's information, your intellectual property, copyrighted stuff, and they take all that away. And remember, they can search any part of your hard drive. It's not restricted to the information they're looking for anything else. So they go on a fishing expedition. Okay, in America, you don't do that. You say, you want to find something specific, tell us what exactly you're looking for. You do that sort of search. And you don't go on a general hunt and say, well, you know what, I can't find drugs, let me find pornography. To ensure state procedures in court, what was actually in the PC? How do you show to the court what's in the PC? So, at the end of the day, when you want to basically prove your innocence, you don't have that computer. You don't know whether that computer is being tampered with. Because the way they're doing it physically right now, it's not protected.
And they're not giving you a copy of what.
And they don't give you a copy of what you're basically going to take. Exactly, absolutely right. So they don't say, I'm taking the laptop, but here's a copy. And I'm digitally signing this to make sure that nothing is altered. No. They just pick up the laptop and they're off, and they're gone. And tomorrow, if they want to add stuff into it, of course they can. Council of Europe Convention on Cybercrimes actually says the following. This is the Cybercrime Convention. It says, you need to keep a proper balance between the interests of law enforcement and respect for fundamental human rights.
Yeah.
It talks about it. It's itself is saying this law needs to, every country that signs on to this convention must make sure it keeps this proper balance. It talks about the 1967 United Nations International Covenant on Civil Political Rights as well as other applicable international human rights treaties. The right of everyone to hold opinions without interference, as well as the right to freedom of expression, including the freedom to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas of all kinds, regardless of frontiers, and the right concerning the respect for privacy. And so while you're making a law to stop cybercrime, you're also saying we don't want to stop people from doing the normal business, their life, carry on with it, and to have the freedom to collect, transfer information. But the legislation you've seen just right now doesn't do any of that. Doesn't actually keep a proper balance. Doesn't take into account any of the things written right now. It in fact... करना नहीं था.
Preamble जो है ना Budapest Convention की ने इंडिया से कॉपी
किया. Exactly. Article 15. Conditions and safeguards. In this convention internationally, there is a requirement that each party shall ensure what? That they have conditions and safeguards provided for under the domestic law. There are no conditions and safeguards under this law that we're talking about. We shall provide for adequate protection of human rights and liberties. It's a requirement. Ours has none. It again talks about the UN Convention. It says, incorporate the principle of proportionality. There is no such thing that you've seen in everything that you've read so far. It also says, in its explanation, it says, please keep in mind the nature of the power of the procedure that is going to be laid down, because it's very, very expansive power, an arbitrary power. You must have, among other things, judicial or other independent supervision. What does our law do? Creates a federal government tribunal appointed by the federal government. Ground justifying application, where every time you want a warrant, you need to give grounds. Where does it in our law say what ground? It doesn't exist. Limitation on the scope. Well, how do you limit the scope of the control of the warrant and the power? Is there any limitation? No. Any computer, anytime, anywhere, any place.
And not limited.
And not limited to, including but not limited to. In fact, yeah, it's including but not limited to reversal of that. The duration of such power procedure, how long can you do it for? Doesn't say. Doesn't talk about what the warrant's going to, what the structure and the procedure of the warrant is at all under this law. You know what the answer to this, if you really ask some guy in the industry, rules mein dalenge. Countries shall consider the impact of the powers and procedures upon the rights, responsibilities and legitimate interests of third parties. You must do so, says the Convention internationally. But none of these things, which are international law, which are rights that every country agrees should be with its citizens, have been given to the people in Pakistan. The UK, because you talk about 9/11 ke baad, etc., still has this legislation that says that when you want protected information to be disclosed, disclosure of protected information, proportionate to what is sought to be achieved by some position. Not just everything, not all the information, but what's proportionate to what you're trying to find. Balance. Necessary on the grounds of interest of national security, purpose of preventing or detecting a crime, or in the interest of economic well-being of the United Kingdom. These are the only three grounds on which you can actually get a warrant to do this in the UK. You must give notice and a warrant. So, a user gets a notice. In writing, produces a record of its having been given. You must show to the court that you notice दी थी मैंने party. Describe the protected information. क्या वो protected information थी जिस I was trying to find. Specify what was in that information. Specify the office, rank or position held by the person giving the notice. Who are you? Which officer? Time by which the notice is to be complied with, and set out the disclosure that is required by the notice and the form and manner in which it is to be made. So when they send it to a service provider, they give all this information that the man has a right to go to court and say yes or no, this particular guy sent this notice to me, etc. It's a transparent, non-arbitrary system. In the UK, not in Pakistan. You must describe what communication you're looking for. You must say, I'm looking for this kind of a communication. You must say how many premises you're going to raid. Are you going to raid every premises all over Pakistan, or are you looking for a certain single set of premises? You must specify. Addresses, numbers, apparatus. Look at the different details you've got to give before you get a warrant and issue, serve a notice. You must protect the data. You must retain the data. This is the government agency has to do this. The government agency must protect the data it collects. It must retain the data it collects. And after it is done with the entire investigation, it must destroy that data because it doesn't allow the data to go to third party. Okay? Look at the amount of protection that there. And by the way, the last one, which is the most interesting. Anybody who violates this law, i.e. an officer of the state or investigating officer who doesn't destroy, retain or protect that data of yours, who doesn't give you proper notice, you can actually sue them in the court of law in England and get damages recovered. There's a lot more, but we'll skip that. In the US, also you have this under Title 18 and under Chapter 121, stored wire and electronic communications and transactional records access. Basically, we're talking about real-time communication.
And how long can they, are they required?
They don't know. No, that 90-day period hai nahi. What you do basically is they tell you specifically which data at what time they want to store. The government does the data collection itself, so it doesn't put the burden on the yes, exactly. It is echelon. It collects all the data itself. You want to do it? Fine, pay for it. Requirements for court order. Only if the government entity offers, i.e. whoever wants this court order to be issued by the court, that government entity must have specific and articulable facts showing reasonable grounds to believe that contents of electronic communication or the records or other information sought are relevant and material to an ongoing criminal investigation. This is a requirement. This is the standard they have to satisfy before you get a warrant in the US. You can also go and quash or modify the court order if you're a customer. You don't have that right here. Now, I'm skipping a lot, but you can see how much there is in the US and in the UK to protect. You've got mechanisms. यहाँ कोई भी नहीं. Customer challenge, within 40 days after notice, you have a right to go to court and say, इसको बंद कराओ, ये गलत किया, ये मेरी information देख रहे हैं, गलत कर रहे हैं, पूरी चीज़ को खत्म किया जाए. Motion to quash and subpoena and all of that stuff. Anyway, and this is the best one. court or department or agency shall determine the violation of this law, and the court shall also determine circumstances surrounding the violation which raises serious questions about whether or not an officer or employee of the United States acted willfully or intentionally with respect to the violation. And if they find that yes, this officer acted willfully intentionally with respect to a violation, then the department or agency shall, upon the decision of the court, promptly initiate a proceeding to determine whether disciplinary action against the officer employee is warranted. That's your protection. You can file it.
How do you prove willfully or intentionally?
Well, you have to prove it in court that basically he had no evidence, he filed a false application, all the grounds that were given were false, etc., and he did it deliberately. For instance, if this was here in Pakistan today, that case of Faisal Chauhan, we could actually file a case against that particular person who put that man into jail for a month and a half when he lost his son and he lost all his business. He could have actually done something, but unfortunately in Pakistan, there was no law under which he could sue. So we need stuff like this, because every day they're going to be using this legislation. And it's a way of making sure that the FIA knows and takes responsibility for what it's doing, because it's not its liable about it. If you want to change the wording, fine, give more further protection. Maybe we do need that, maybe we don't. But at least have something there. This law hasn't got anything. So there's international cooperation. These are all the 34 signatories of the Council of Europe Convention. Every major country has signed it. And so this is, whatever I'm talking about is international standard. But we decided not to follow any definition. You saw all the definitions earlier that we didn't follow, which were available. So what is required? A legal regime which is harmonious and compatible with the rest of the world. You can't fight cybercrime because the guys are across borders. If you can't cooperate because you don't have the same legal regime, compatible legal regime, there's no way you're going to catch these guys. So if you deliberately create a legal regime which is incompatible, you create a safe haven for cyber criminals. That's what we've done, right? A completely unique legal scenario. So we're welcoming all the hackers of the world. Very friendly. Please come here to Pakistan or use our services. Harmonious, compatible definitions of offenses. All the offenses that we got, spamming, spoofing, all you saw which is incorrect, we must make sure the definitions are correct and harmonious with the rest of the world. Harmonious and compatible powers and protections. So that during this whole debate about how America is sending people to Egypt and to other countries to be basically tortured, this whole concept of exporting them, so they torture, so they have no responsibility. The same thing applies over here. If you do an investigation in Pakistan and the procedure and powers are contrary to fundamental human rights, then that entire investigation and the evidence that has been collected cannot actually be used in the States. So you can't cooperate, you can't actually catch the cyber criminal. Because you got your evidence incorrectly through unconstitutional, a breach of fundamental human rights. So basically what this means is, at the end of the day, this law helps nobody to actually solve a criminal offense. But what it does do is, makes available enough powers for abuse.
And some fundraising.
And some fundraising.
Lots of fundraising.
Lots
That's
of
been the
fundraising.
basis of most laws. in
Yes,
Pakistan,
unfortunately.
particularly the laws against criminal discriminatory laws.
That's really right. I know, everybody's a little tired after about an hour and a half, 2 hours or whatever. There you are. That's what this law does.
The lawyers' movement has gained a lot of traction and momentum recently
Yes.
with the Chief Justice issue.
Yeah.
Is anyone other than you taking up this issue
No.
in the legal community?
No.
So again, yesterday's concern and today as well, and this has to be a sustained movement. The E in this bill is going to make people think that this has to do with techies.
Yeah.
I'm not a techie. I'm an artist. I do physics. I'm a banker. मेरा तो technology से कोई ताल्लुक ही नहीं है. You've been studying technology and the law for a long time, and therefore you've gotten into this. How do we make this digestible and how do we scare people basically?
By sending out emails in one year.
How do we make people aware?
Get hold of lawyers and have a.
I mean, we need the lawyers because right now they're high on what they've achieved.
Right.
So that traction
Okay.
needs to be leveraged. I hate these
No, it's
words
fine,
I'm using,
fine,
but
yeah.
So and use that because they feel they have power,
Yes.
and now's the best time.
But are they interested?
But they need to be interested. That's the thing.
I don't want to
Can't we
comment.
get
I don't want to comment on the lawyers' movements, interests, etc. And I'm going to be very sort of non-committal on that issue. But I do know that if you get them interested, I'm sure they'll make some noise. And I'm sure this will help their cause also, which is against the government, to criticize. So yes, from that point of view, it does help. One of the things I did on today's emailing was there's a gentleman called Rafi Alam in Lahore.
Yes.
I'll raise issues over here. I hope he raises issues in Lahore. He's very vocal and he has good communication skills with a civil society aspect law.
And he's on radio,
So he's on radio. So I hope he does that there. He will liaise with them.
How does he get his technical expertise?
He doesn't. We need to help him.
Yeah.
We need to help him. He doesn't know this technically. I've emailed a whole bunch of this stuff to him this last night or this morning actually. And what I'm going to do is probably do something of this sort of a presentation hopefully for the bar here in Karachi. But that's going to be maybe a week or so when I come back. But I'm going to try to basically do that for the Karachi bar as well. The amount of interest they may or may not have is another matter.
Is it possible for by some means to convince the Chief Justice to take suo motu action, which he loves to leave it?
You can't. It's not law.
It's not law yet, and so you have to wait for it to be legislated by Parliament. And yes, then after that, we could definitely try to do that.
Zahid, looking at the political unrest now, is it the wrong time to raise the issue? Because I get the perception that Nawaz Sharif is coming in and all those issues coming in. Do we hold up?
Obviously, they're not actually covering the crimes which they're saying they're covering. And so the cyber criminals going free. Okay, so what does this law protect? What does it do? It doesn't protect. And it creates offenses which shouldn't be